What is the secret you discovered that made you leave your ex? We had been together for 10 years and had 3 kids. My youngest was 4 months old when this happened. He was an abusive, narcissistic manipulator, and I stayed far too long. We were getting ready for a cottage trip with family friends and their kids, packing and doing last-minute store runs. The day before the trip, he went absolutely nuts. The tipping point was me telling him he didn't need to buy a 4th pair of swim shorts since I had already packed the 3 he had at home. It wasn't a big deal. If he wanted them, get them. If he was happy with 3, don't. He lost it. He took it as proof that I didn't care about him and went on a rampage in Walmart, in the car, and at home, all in front of our kids. I was distraught. I ended up taking our packed bags and leaving for my father's house at 12 a.m. because he wouldn't calm down, and my eldest was terrified. To me, that was the end of the relationship, and I started planning how to get out. I still went to the cottage the next morning. I told my friend and her husband what had happened, and they agreed I should come on my own with the kids. Since I left at 12 a.m., I had 0 contact with him. I blocked him. We went to the cottage to escape the chaos. The kids asked where their dad was, and I told them he had behaved badly and would be missing out this time. On the second day, my friend's husband, who was very close with my ex, invited him to join us without telling me. When he showed up, I was terrified. Suddenly, he was calm and apologetic, promising he would never behave that way again. Full-on love bombing and pretending to finally recognize his mistakes. He ended up staying, and the rest of the weekend was great because he went above and beyond his usual efforts as a dad. On the way home, we decided to get a hotel and stay a few extra nights in the area and got intimate. When we got back from the trip, a few days, maybe a week, went by and something didn't feel right. I went to the doctor and she ran some tests. I told her there was no way it could be an STD, maybe a UTI or something else. She told me I had gonorrhea. I didn't tell my ex anything. I realized he must have cheated on me the night of his wild rage, so I started asking questions, hoping to catch him off guard. It didn't take long before I told him about the gonorrhea. He broke down, saying how sorry he was, and I asked how it happened. He said that after we left, he went downtown, got drunk, fell asleep on a park bench, and woke up to someone giving him blowy. From that day on, I started planning my escape. Between then and when I finally left him, I found conversations between him and other men about doing it. I found searches for S-workers in the area and GPS history that matched those ads. He still denies everything to this day, even when I confronted him. Complete denial. I'm so glad I found out before I wasted more time with this a-hole or had more kids with him. Story 2. I thought the safe in his closet contained rare coins and his passport, but that was a lie. After we broke up, our mutual friend told me it was filled with guns, Nazi paraphernalia from his father's military service in Germany, and murderabilia, letters, pictures, and yearbooks of serial killers. The full-body chills I got made me feel like I had possibly died of shock in that moment. I'm a huge liberal, terrified of guns, and disgusted by people who keep Nazi stuff under the guise of, it was my father's. That's 15 months of my life I'll never get back. And the best friend of 20 years he was sleeping with the entire time behind my back. Life is amazing today with my husband of 13 years, and his crusty ex is still churning through girlfriends and paying for abortions in his 50s. Story 3. She was in contact with my ex-wife, plotting to help her get custody of my 2 sons. I had total custody and a permanent restraining order against my ex-wife. She was taking photos of us and sending them to her. I ended up hiring a private investigator to make sure this whack job left the state and went back to her mother halfway across the country. I later found out she was married and hiding from her husband, and had been going to court to change her last name to stay hidden from her ex-husband's. Total nutcase. Story 4. He had $20,000 in unsecured debt that he hid from me. Then he bought a car we had already agreed we couldn't afford. He even called me at work to tell me he had bought it. I think he figured I would yell until I got over it, and then he'd have his car. I came home and didn't yell. The next day, I took the rest of our savings and started a separate account he didn't know about. It took me a year to leave. Nobody was as shocked as he was when I finally did. Story 5. My daughter's iPhone was a hand-me-down from my wife at the time. One night, when my then-wife took our twins to a sleepover at a friend's house while she went out with her co-workers, I heard the phone buzz and thought I'd plug it in so it would be charged when my daughter came home the next day. When I did, the screen lit up and showed a screenshot of a text with hearts. My child was 6, and since they use drawing apps on the iPhone, we let them use an older one. I thought I should be a responsible parent and check to make sure it was nothing inappropriate. What I found shocked me. My then-wife had confessed in text screenshots in graphic detail to her lover all kinds of things via her iPhone. Her messages were synced in real time with my daughter's phone. She was secretly involved with a mutual friend over an hour away. She had brought the kids to her friend's house so she could drive to a different city that night to meet him. Everything from, I can't stand to be in the same room with him. When I say I love you, I actually mean it. We need to figure out a way to time it so our friends don't disown us. And I told him I was extra busy, but I took a second job so I could save up enough to move out. That man stayed on the couch on New Year's, and she kept texting about how she wished she could sneak down and be with him. Not only that, but she had secretly messaged all our friends, don't bring it up with me because he's a private person, but we're going through a mutual divorce. We were not. She was grooming our friends, planning in advance so she wouldn't look like the villain when everything came to light. Everyone but me knew and had been lied to and manipulated to the point where I could trust no one anymore. This was the wife I had spent almost a decade with, doing everything together. She was bipolar, narcissistic, had ADHD, and was obsessively addicted to something new each month. I constantly stayed, endured it, and wrote it out so we could be happy together and raise our kids. She did not care what it would do to anyone. That heartless, selfish, self-absorbed monster in that instant crushed our family. There would be no more Christmas mornings opening presents together by the tree. I would miss half of my children's childhood. I would sit alone in an empty house, terrified of my own shadow, paranoid, wondering if I could ever trust anyone again. As I went through the phone, I discovered all the people who had helped her sneak him behind my back. I later learned she had hidden cameras in the house, trying to catch me doing something wrong so she could shift the blame onto me and justify her pre-planned divorce. When I confronted her, she broke down, begging me to forgive her. I stayed stoic and emotionless until I was able to get a post-nuptial agreement in place for us to sign. I did not sleep for 5 days. I locked my room and would not let her in. I decided I could still be a loving father to my kids and hold it together, trying to give them a decent childhood while seeing if she was truly remorseful. On our anniversary, she hired someone to write a song about us. In it, she asked me for a second chance and blamed everything on her disorders and impulsiveness, why she had spent time with someone else. I was depressed. I could not let her touch me without flinching. About a year passed before I started to see that she was making an effort and thought I might be able to move on and give her a chance, for the kids' sake. Then she did it again, with a different man. This time, we were at a week-long gaming event. She volunteered to stay for another week while I went home to watch the kids. Apparently, everyone there knew she was flirting with him and never said a word. How humiliating. Back home, the water heater broke. I was struggling through 12-hour workdays, caring for 2 kids, taking freezing showers, counting the days until she returned, and losing my mind, still unaware of what had happened with the other man. She was supposed to come home on Sunday, but decided to stay another day. Our family was struggling at home and could have really used her support, but no, another day. She finally came home at 10 p.m. the next day, with no explanation. A few weeks later, she announced she wanted a divorce and was moving out, claiming things were not working out, just as I was finally emerging from my depression and beginning to see a chance at trusting her again. She moved out a week later. Not even a month passed. On my birthday weekend, she was supposed to watch the kids. We had executed the post-nuptial agreement so I would keep the house and we would share the kids' time 50-50. She decided to bail, so I spent my birthday at the museum with my children, which was fine. I loved them to death. It turned out she was in another state on my birthday with the new man, and she made it Facebook official the day after my birthday. It just goes to show how deeply sick narcissists can be. It has been a year. I am doing okay. I try not to think about it much because it triggers panic attacks, and I hate the feeling of suffocating. It could have been worse. Story. He was looking to buy a gun because he believed I had a devil inside me and wanted to kill me. He had already destroyed my hard drive for the same reason after making a disastrous stock pick. We were in marriage counseling, but he refused to work with our female counselor, so the group assigned him a male one instead. Thank God his psychologist warned my psychologist, who told me to leave the house immediately. I left everything behind. Story 6. She married her husband around the 4th month of dating exclusively. She never told me she was in a serious relationship. We lived together at her parents' apartment and acted like a couple, though our jobs often required long-distance periods. We spoke every day by phone, always like a couple, enjoying our chemistry and planning a future together. We spent as much time together as we could, though most of it involved traveling, or so I thought. She finally told me the truth when she got pregnant with him, 16 years later, and immediately ghosted me to live full-time with him. It happened over the phone. Her entire family blocked me at the same time and threw all my belongings onto the street. I was kept in the dark for 16 years. Story 7. This is an old one. Back in junior year of high school, I was dating the so-called weird girl. She had blonde hair, was thin, and wore big glasses. I always thought she was cute, despite some rumors I had heard about her. One rumor was that she was having a relation with her brother, which I assumed was made up by the popular kids at our school. A few months into the relationship, she got really into religion. She started going to church every Sunday, which soon expanded to Wednesdays as well. She became a complete Catholic church guru. This is no dig at religion or religious people. I had friends of all faiths, but she became obsessed with church. Senior year of high school arrived, and during the first week, she asked to meet at her house after school. When I arrived, she sat me down and told me she needed to confess her sins to me. She said she had a vision that we were going to get married and start a ranch together. She straight up told me about how for months she and her brother were doing it in her family's pool house the whole time we were in a relationship. Then she talked about how it took her a lot of courage and humility to reveal that to me, and how she just stopped doing it with her brother 1 month ago. She then confessed that she liked to trap the wild rabbits behind her house in little cages and set them on fire in her outhouse when her parents were at work, and that she had only stopped a few weeks ago. I ended up waiting for her to go to the bathroom, then hopped on my bike and pedaled for my life back home. I only recently found out that, as an adult, she was arrested for animal abuse and for hitting and abusing her husband at the time. P.S. I am now happily married to the love of my life, and our 3-year anniversary is next month. Story 8. Her dad never actually died. To be fair, it was a toxic relationship. She was pretty abusive and constantly lied and gaslighted me. It's strange because I knew much of this, but would brush it aside and make excuses. This one lie, though, was the final straw that made me realize I needed to get out. Early in our relationship, she told me her dad was very sick. I supported her through it, but it seemed like he was getting worse and worse. She said he had brain cancer. After a couple of months, she told me he had passed away. Having never lost a parent myself, I was horrified for her and did everything I could to be there. After the funeral, which she refused to let me attend, she came back to my place in full funeral attire, with a veil, gloves, and mascara running down her cheeks. I comforted her as she talked about the shock of burying her dad. Over the next few months, we grew very close as I helped her work through the grief. A year or so later, the relationship had become horrendously toxic. She'd cheated on me, hit me, gaslit me, and isolated me from my family. I was living in a kind of trance, accepting this as my reality because every time we had a break, she would plead her case and I'd take her back. One day, I was sitting in a random university lecture when I noticed a Facebook message request. I clicked on it, and my heart dropped. It was from her dad. He'd messaged me, "What are you doing with my daughter?" At first, I stalked the profile, thinking it was fake, but then I realized it was real. I assumed someone must have hacked her dead dad's account. After all, he was supposed to be dead, and she'd gone to the funeral. As I started piecing things together, it slowly dawned on me. Maybe he had never died. I left the class and called her, saying, "Your dad just messaged me on Facebook. What the heck is going on?" She basically admitted that he never died, and that she'd made the whole thing up for whatever BS reason. In that moment, it was like a light finally switched on, and I realized I needed to be a million miles away from her. There was no excuse she could make that would ever justify what she'd done. I broke up with her for good right after that. I've recovered now and come to terms with how awful that relationship was, thankfully. These days, whenever I'm hanging out with friends and someone mentions a crazy ex story, I can feel all their heads turn to me. Story 9. His addiction to cam girl sites came to light via an insane credit card bill he could no longer hide. The card was through his bank, and he had maxed out an already astronomical credit limit. The bank had started taking 80% of his deposited paychecks to pay it down. When I discovered it, the bill was over $150,000, and he could no longer cover his share of household expenses because the bank was garnishing his pay. Seriously though, corn is free, and of wasn't even a thing yet. It split in 2015. How on earth do you rack up $150,000 on cam girl sites? And in secret, no less. Where was he even doing it? Bathroom breaks at work or something? We were literally together every waking minute outside of work. By that point, we had been together 9.5 years. A supposedly smart man had managed to tank both his relationship and his credit in one go. Story 10. Her secret heart. She wanted to be a trad wife. In my 30s, I was working a well-paying union job as a welder in a shipyard, a job I truly loved. I owned a home, had no other debt, and our car was paid off. She worked as a sushi waitress a couple of times a week, earning all of our fun money plus a little extra for her hobbies. Things were chill. We shared our car, which wasn't a big deal since our shifts never overlapped. If she ever needed it during the day, she'd bring it to work at 5 a.m. and head back afterward to do her day. A few years went by and she expressed interest in going back to school. Awesome. She'd had some public school trauma, so we spent a lot of time talking it over. She decided to start with one community college art class. Low stakes, creative, and aligned with her interests. She loved it. Wonderfully, she loved it so much that she wanted to start full-time classes. We went over our finances. I could pick up overtime easily, so I'd take an extra shift a couple of times a month, and she'd drop down to one shift at sushi. It made things tight, but she was really starting to blossom. Then the next quarter rolled around, and she decided she needed a car of her own to take the classes she wanted. Sharing a car had its limits. We went over the finances again. The only way to make it work was either for her to earn $300 more a month to cover the new car note, or for me to work 6 days a week, every week. I said I would not do that. Shipyard welding is hard work. This is when her secret was revealed. She told me, with vitriol and rage, "I will never work as hard as you. I will never earn as much as you. You have to take care of me that way, and you need to get used to that now." It was then that I realized I didn't have a wife who wanted a 50-50 partnership. She wanted me to spend my lifetime providing her with a lifestyle she wasn't willing to work for herself. 10 years built up to that moment. 7 years of marriage shattered by that secret heart of hers. I filed for divorce 3 months later and never looked back. Story 11. I saw a message preview on her lock screen. A guy heart reacting to a message from her that said, "At least you know whenever I'm with him, I'm thinking of you." We had just come back from a holiday for our anniversary and had just moved in together. Story 12. We used to have weekly lunch dates on Wednesdays at the same restaurant. He always said it was his favorite place and that he was only available at noon on Wednesdays. One Wednesday, my phone was stolen at work, but I decided to go wait for him at our usual spot anyway. I was chatting with a waitress I hadn't seen there before and eventually asked to borrow her phone to call my boyfriend and let him know my phone had been stolen but that I was waiting for him. I typed in his number and the contact came up with a photo of him and his dog in his bed, completely bare. The waitress and I both said at the same time, "How do you know my boyfriend?" She usually had Wednesdays off and was just covering a shift that day. They apparently have weekly Wednesday dinner dates. Story 13. I bragged to a friend, in front of my girlfriend, that we had only fought once in our 2 years of dating. She replied that the reason we never fought was because she didn't care enough about me to fight about anything. She was also cheating on me, though I didn't learn that until after the relationship ended. Story 14. The guy she was cheating on me with found out about me. He tracked me down at a bar, told me everything, bought me a drink, and I immediately called her and broke up with her. I won't go into deep detail, but it was a relief to have an honorable guy warn me instead of enduring weeks of suspicion. I was about to get an apartment with her, and I definitely dodged a bullet. Story 15. Turns out, he was a PDF file continuing an extramarital affair with a single mom so he could essay her daughter with permission. They're both in prison now. Story 16. 3 months after moving our 3 kids and ourselves to another state, she was cheating and got pregnant. She had that child with him, then went on to cheat on him to get pregnant again, this time with twins. That made 6 kids in 7 years with 3 people that I know of. Story 17. The coworker. He worried I was attracted to, I was. The difference is that I never spoke to him about anything outside of work and shut it down immediately when he showed interest. A female coworker gave my ex 1 ounce of attention and he cheated and left me for her almost immediately. He later regretted it and said the grass isn't always greener. Now he's still with her because I wouldn't move back with him and he didn't want to be alone. I'm glad I stayed on my side of the lawn. I would never want to be responsible for how awful another person feels because I couldn't stay faithful at work. A partner should never have to feel insecure about you simply going to your job. Story 18. She was talking to a guy in another state and decided she liked him better. He was coming to visit her, and that's when I found out about him. She basically told me he wouldn't be happy to see me around and that I should go away. The joke was on her. He showed up to tell her he had met someone back home and was breaking up with her. After he left, she came crawling back to me. As much as I wanted to get back together, I couldn't trust her. Story 19. She went out with her friends one night. I had a headache and didn't feel like going anywhere, so I stayed in. She had messed up before, So we were doing the whole location sharing thing. This idiot still went to this guy's house and didn't come home until 5 a.m. Truth is, I didn't really have a headache. I had a feeling she was talking to him again, so I let it happen. It was a Friday night, and Saturday night we had dinner planned with her parents, who were in town. I figured I'd suffer through it, focus on finding a new place immediately, and disappear the next week. At dinner on Saturday, her mom said, "Let me know when you want to propose, and I'll give you my ring." My ex nudged me and said, "Yeah, when are you gonna ask, huh?" I laughed so hard, knowing she had been with someone else less than 24 hours earlier. Sunday morning, she started going on about the dishes as I was doing them. I finally got so fed up that I just laughed and asked, "So, where were you Friday night?" She turned white. Story 20. I had always suspected something because he liked all her posts on Facebook but barely liked mine anymore. But maybe it was just the algorithm, right? I rationalized it. Then, during a get-together with our friends, my stomach dropped when I saw her face walk in the door. I held it together for about 3 hours, but I couldn't help noticing how they lit up when they talked to each other. I ended up going to the bathroom to throw up and pull myself together. I told myself I was overreacting, imagining things that weren't there, letting anxiety from my last relationship, where he had cheated, take over. I spent an hour there crying, and he didn't even check on me. I finally went out and didn't see either of them. I don't know what compelled me, but I looked for them, and there they were, on top of each other. Neither of them even looked at me. They just stopped and stared at the wall like I wasn't there. They said nothing. He denied it until the day I blocked him. He claimed she was just drunk, and he was being there for her. I wanted to tell him I needed him to be there for me, but there was no point. There was no rational thought in his words. He was just saying whatever he thought would make it easiest to end the conversation. It didn't matter what I said because he didn't care. Even his friends admitted it. And now, she's his girlfriend, and I've never been able to love since. Story 21. I want to preface this by saying we had an open relationship, so him being with other women wasn't the issue, but it became relevant to my decision to leave. One day, I came home from work. He greeted me affectionately. We banged, ate dinner, and everything seemed fine. The next morning, I went to the computer and found a video on the screen. It was of us being intimate the day before, and the hidden webcam was still running. We had talked about filming ourselves before and had done it a few times, but not in years. I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt, so I approached him. I told him what I found, that I wasn't okay with the secrecy, and that if he wanted to film us together, he needed to involve me in the decision. He agreed, apologized, and we moved on. A little less than a year later, I was woken up by him coming to bed. I felt him lift the blanket, saw a flash of light, and turned to see that he was taking photos of me with his phone while he thought I was asleep. I freaked out, and we had a massive argument. I told him again that this was a huge boundary violation. I told him I was not okay with this kind of thing, asked why he would do it to me, and how he could see me at my most vulnerable and see only an opportunity to take advantage of that. But I didn't get much of an answer beyond, I don't know. I made him delete the photos, and he left the bedroom to sleep on the couch, but not before asking if I wanted to break up. I was still struggling with what had just happened and wasn't thinking clearly enough to make a decision like that, so I told him no. I asked if he had done this to other people, and he said no, just me, I guess. We moved on from it. As much as I was able to move on, that is, because I stayed for another year. That year was the darkest time of my life. I was terrified he would do it again, of cameras being in our bedroom, of him spying on me through my phone camera. I covered myself all the time. I put stickers on my phone camera and on my laptop. I was afraid to sleep bare, though I forced myself a few times in the hope it would help get rid of the fear. But I wasn't able to truly forgive him, trust him, or shake the paranoia that the times I had caught him were not the only times he had done this. I ended up snooping through his accounts on the computer. I found videos of other women over the last couple of years, escorts or hookups, I'm not sure, taken with a hidden camera, and something in me broke. He had lied to my face when I asked if he had done this to anyone else. I told him I was leaving that week. He didn't know that I already knew about the other videos. It took me a long time to get over the shame of staying as long as I did. I blamed myself for not putting my foot down the first time and leaving. Setting a boundary means nothing if there is no consequence. It felt as if I had given him the permission to treat me and others that way. Story 22. About 10 years ago, my father received an anonymous letter claiming that my mother was having an affair and had been for the past 4 years. We didn't have any proof, but my mother was very secretive and extremely protective of her iPad. It almost became a sad running joke about the secrets of her iPad. I actually walked by her while she was using it one day and snatched it out of her hands just to mess with her and get a reaction. She jumped up from the couch, grabbed my arm, and took the iPad back, yelling at me not to touch her things. One day, my mother was out working overtime, and my sister discovered her iPad was unlocked. She went through it and found that my mother was meeting her affair partner at that very moment. My father called me, distraught and in tears, asking what he should do. I told him to let me handle things and for him to stay home with my sister. I found the restaurant they were at, turned my phone on to record, and went inside. There, I discovered my mother with her affair partner. The look on her face was one of shock as I walked over to their booth, sat down next to her, ordered a beer, and asked what was going on. She began to make excuses, but I called her on her BS and told her I knew this had been going on for years and had just been waiting for my chance to catch them. The affair partner, who was married with a family of their own, began apologizing, saying they knew how awful it was and how sorry they were. I looked at my mother and asked why the affair partner was apologizing when she hadn't apologized yet. And my mother just quietly said, "I'm sorry." I asked more questions to gather information, all while recording, and after the most awkward 20 minutes of my life, I wished them a happy life and left the bar. On my way to my father's house, I made a pit stop at Home Depot to buy new locks for the door. I went to his house and changed the locks. My mother claims she slept in her car that night before asking to come by the next day to get some clothes, after which she moved into her brother's house. Over the following 2 years during the divorce proceedings, I served as an unofficial mediator, delivering messages or gathering possessions to drop off to my mother. When their divorce was finalized, a weight lifted off my shoulders. My days of being a go-between and a messenger were over, and I could reclaim a little bit of my sanity. It was a very difficult thing for me to do, but I was the right person for the job and took care of my family. My father and I have a great relationship, and my relationship with my mother is not strained, but I do feel awkward around her sometimes. My mother's choices caused her to miss major family moments, such as my wedding, birthdays of her grandchildren, christenings, and more. I do not know if she ever would have left my father had I not intervened, but I believe that the steps I took that night made everyone's lives better in the long run. I probably need therapy because of the mental anguish and heartache this caused me, but for now, years later, I can still tell people around me that I'm fine. Story 23. Well, it was our 5th wedding anniversary, and he left his phone downstairs. He says now that he knew, which is why he ran down once he realized he had left it. But he had videos of my closet, my designer bags and luxury items taped by him, and was offering all of my belongings to escorts whose names looked like they were methamphetamine references. That night, he left, and 2 $100 bills were missing, along with a Prada bag I've never seen again. He had a Snapchat story up and was gone for only about an hour and a half because I had stayed up nursing our newborn. I was done. Seeing him go through my clothes and my stuff, showing it to a stranger, it was so violating and invasive. I was so grossed out. Story 24. He was a recovered addict whom I had known well since we were 17 or 18. And we had been together for years, in our mid to late 20s. It turned out he had never really stopped using and would do drugs in our apartment while I slept. When he could no longer contribute to bills and groceries, I discovered he had gambled every penny he had left away on a mobile app. Once it was all put into perspective, he left willingly, for my sake. I hope he's better now. I don't hate him, but I do hate what he was doing to both of us. Story 25. The first girlfriend I had wanted us to run each other's credit to make sure we were financially compatible. I agreed. She signed up for her credit report, and I signed up for mine. She gave me a copy of her Experian report, a PDF, and it looked good, so it ticked the box for fiscally responsible. A few weeks later, I overheard her talking to 2 different collection agencies and wondered why she would be if her credit score was over 780. I confronted her about it, and she admitted she had doctored the credit report because she liked me and had horrible credit. I told her I would have stayed with her if she had been making an effort to clean up her financial past, but I couldn't overlook the lying. Story 26. She and I had been high school best friends and dated briefly before she broke up with me after graduation. We remained friends, had conversations to reconcile, and continued to stay in contact for over 18 years. We had a silly pact that if we were both over 35 and single, we would marry each other. Well, we were both single, done with dating, and obviously had chemistry, so we decided to give it a slow, serious try. I was all in and didn't suspect anything. She lived about 2 hours away by direct flight, so seeing each other was easy. A few months in, she had a manic episode and went missing. I called her parents, who hadn't heard from her in a week as they were out of town. They sent her sister to check on her and were calling friends. I called her work at the deli where she was employed. The moment I mentioned that I was her boyfriend, her boss said, "Well, I'm her boyfriend." Suffice to say, she had been living a double life. He had been giving her money for flights to visit sick family members, me, and to see my dying dad, whom she had told him was her uncle. I had also helped her with flights a couple of times, so she was pocketing the money. Her family and I stayed in contact throughout, and I told them what was happening. She didn't like that, because it exposed her fraud to her family. Story 27. Not me, but a very close friend discovered that her husband had been using apps to cheat on her with basically everyone he could, both men and women. It had been going on for years, and in their own home. The worst part, though, was when someone sent her a screenshot from a hookup app he used with other men. Apparently, he had met a trucker in a lay-by and given him a blowy, and the app even allowed users to leave reviews of their encounters. So, not only did she find out he had been cheating on her with other men, but also that he apparently was really good at giving blowies to truckers. Story 28. He always claimed to be the funny one in the relationship. It was part of his personality. For context, he cheated on me, but that wasn't the secret that broke me. Honestly, I probably would have forgiven him if it weren't for this. Afterwards, I found his secret Twitter account. He followed all the girls he had told me not to worry about, and every single tweet was my jokes and clever observations. Jokes he had never laughed at. And now he was using my comedy to seem funny and cool to other girls. Story 29. She worked at one of the stores I had merchandised for years. My previous relationship had ended, so a few months later, I approached her and gave her my number. She texted enthusiastically, but said she had just gotten out of a relationship and didn't want to rush into anything. I was like, hey, me too. We got along really well and hung out every day for 9 months. Then, one night while I was on vacation, she teased me over the phone when she heard me tell my mom that I was talking to a friend. She said, "A friend, eh?" I said we could talk about it when I got home. It had been 9 months, so I assumed it was safe to say we were together now. She got quiet and stopped texting me. I was completely confused. I made a Facebook account and looked her up. She had never broken up with her boyfriend. Essentially, she had cheated on both of us for 9 months. That was fun. I messaged the guy and told him to call me. When I told him, the first thing he said was, "It's not the first time she's done this." Then he asked, "She told me you guys hooked up once a couple months ago?" I said, no. We've hooked up nearly every day, sometimes twice a day, for the past 9 months. They're still together and just had a kid. Story 30. My ex had been through a lot in her past. Her family was abusive, and her previous partners were also awful people. She started struggling with her mental health, but we were working through it together. One evening, we went to an event and ran into an inconvenience. Nothing major, just a confluence of events that caused a setback. Life happens. Over the course of about half an hour, she spun it, entirely fictitiously, into a massive, targeted conspiracy meant to ruin her night. She was talking about how the patriarchy was trying to silence her voice so she couldn't shine a light on their activities and so on. I was there. It had nothing to do with us or with her. It was just a random situation that sucked. We were only tangentially affected, but she made herself the center of it and cast herself as the victim. That was when I started rethinking all the stories she had told me, the ones where everyone around her was evil and she was constantly under attack. Did her dad really tear her door off its hinges and scream at her? Did her ex really steal all her money and kick her out? Maybe, maybe not. I had just watched her distort reality into a much worse, fabricated version of events, one she genuinely believed. After that, I couldn't trust her anymore. Story 31. I was with my ex for 7 years. In the first year of our relationship, I was assayed by an acquaintance while on a trip out of state. I went to the hospital, and there was a court case, later dropped, as I was broke and at a really dark place in my life and knew I couldn't put myself through testifying in an out-of-state trial. My ex helped me take photos of my injuries for the detective. It was an incredibly somber and intense time. Years later, around the 7th year of our relationship, he was holding me after being intimate and casually mentioned that he had actually been about to break up with me but then realized he couldn't when I had called him from the hospital. He also said that while he didn't like the fact that I was assayed, he was also really excited by it. He apparently soloed after I had called him, and again, after photographing my injuries. I wish I could say this made me leave him immediately, but it didn't. Our relationship had been full of other intense, awful experiences, and we were definitely trauma bonded. but it did help strip away some of the delusion that he actually cared about me. Story 32. I knew she had cheated on me, and we were trying to have an open relationship to work through it. It had been her idea, and she didn't realize that I already knew about the affair. I was using medical marijuana at night for pain management, and she would get upset about it. I later found out that she had been doing Molly with her affair partner while expecting me to live in pain. She lost all her friends when they discovered she had been lying to them about the situation, after she had told them I had agreed to an open relationship and then changed my mind. Her friends even tried to keep me in their circle, despite everything. Story 33. She was having an affair, a long-term affair with a married man that went on for years before we got married, and at times during our marriage and even up to our divorce. She actually followed him from one state to another when he moved. He was also part of my friend group after we got married because she was helping his wife with a home-based business. I even used to babysit the affair partner's kids. After we divorced, I told them they were crazy. I talked him into leaving his wife, who was indeed unstable. And he and my ex have now been married for close to 10 years. Story 34. She didn't pay the rent. I got upset and asked her if she could cover it, even though I had already given her my portion to send to the landlord. She said she had. A few days later, I got a message from the landlord asking for the rest of the rent. She still hadn't paid it. Finally, I spoke to the landlord myself and took money out of my savings to cover it. When I did the math, I realized that she hadn't just failed to pay the full rent and lied about it, she had also pocketed $50 of the rent money I had given her to send to the landlord. I already had one foot out the door of the relationship by that point, but this was what made me actively start looking for other places to live. Story 35. I had one girlfriend who worked in stationery sales, actually a big business. She once told me that she slept with all the men who were her clients whenever she won a contract. I asked her how I could be sure she wouldn't do that with me. She said, "Trust me." I looked at her and thought, she's been doing this for 12 years, maybe 20 or so contracts a year. Her body count would be higher than John Wick's. I didn't leave, but I took a 3-month gig away from my home state. When I got back, it was over. I didn't cry. Story 36. Found out he'd been going to S-workers for our entire relationship. I got a strange gut feeling one day and looked at his computer. His email opened quite a can of worms. I also found loads of corn saved on his computer. In 6.5 years, I'd never snooped before since it's not something I really believe in. Here's where it gets interesting. I called my mom and a friend over because my world had just imploded and I needed people around. They practically teleported to my side. He came home and said, "It's not what it looks like," and so on, but showed zero remorse. According to my mom and friend, he was even smirking arrogantly. In hindsight, having other people there was useful since they noticed things I might not have. I asked to see his phone, and he said he'd left it in the car. I said, "Okay, go get it, please." I then calmly followed him to his car, which seemed to surprise him. He must have realized I wasn't buying anything he was saying. He also didn't get a chance to delete anything because I was right there. Ultimately, I didn't want to help him work through his corn addiction because there were clearly zero shits given about what I was going through. It became abundantly clear, very quickly, that I would have to completely hate myself to stay with this person. I stuck around long enough to convince him to provide his bank statements. I was mostly curious how often he was using the services of S-workers. I'd retained a lawyer because we'd lived together long enough to be considered as good as married where I'm from. The bank statements ended up revealing multiple investment accounts. It turned out he had been hoarding wealth, increasing his net worth by almost $1 million during our cohabitation. Screw me. I was buying my own groceries and paying for home repairs without being on title. Of course, I know that was foolish. In retrospect, I had very low self-esteem when we started dating, and for much of the relationship, but I gradually built it up as I built my career. I walked away with the dog and a hefty settlement. My settlement was far less than I was technically entitled to, but given how surprised I was by his secret fortune, I don't really care. I also know he didn't disclose his self-directed investments, but I don't care. I went no contact after about a month of pointless arguing, and I'm just happy it's over. Story 37. My ex-husband was having his 4th affair, at least that I know of, and he told my then 13-year-old daughter. He warned her that if she told me or anyone else, he would never speak to her again. After suffering in silence for 2 weeks, she finally told me following a trip to the ER to treat a migraine that had been brought on by stress. Story 38. This wasn't the exact moment I left, but it was when I emotionally checked out and knew the end was near. She didn't have a phone, ID, or anything when I met her. Red flag, I know, but I was naive. So I let her share my phone. using my Text Now number as hers, and stay logged in to Facebook. I tried to respect her privacy, but I could clearly see every notification. Plus, I had trust issues from previous relationships where phone evidence had revealed deception. I started noticing occasional messages that looked like brand new conversations even though they seemed like they were already established. For example, a new message from a guy on Facebook would start with something like, "Oh, okay, so do you want me to call you tonight?" I confronted her, and she would get defensive and come up with elaborate, nonsensical excuses. Not wanting to seem jealous, I'd usually drop it. But as it kept happening, I pressed her harder. She assured me, with believable realism, that it was nothing. I reminded her that if it really was nothing, she could easily leave the messages rather than respond and delete them, but she still insisted it was harmless. She eventually got her own phone, and it happened again. She desperately tried to convince me that one of the numbers was just a friend who sometimes gave her rides, that she'd gladly stop talking to him, and that it was strictly for occasional rides. She insisted she wasn't even interested in him and had only used him for transportation, which is messed up in itself. Pissed and not buying any of it, I reluctantly and stupidly accepted her explanation. I told her to delete his number and made it clear that if she ever talked to him again, we were done. She nonchalantly agreed. "Oh, sure, I don't even care about him. Here, I'll delete it." And she showed me. On top of all this, after months of allowing her total access to my phone, where she could delete anything she didn't want me seeing, like female friends or old pictures, she suddenly became extremely protective of her own phone. She'd even insist on unlocking the phone herself and opening the dialer if I ever needed to use it, or she'd abruptly clutch it if I reached for something near her phone because she assumed that's what I was going for. At that point, the red flags were everywhere, but she was gaslighting the hell out of me and trying to convince me I was paranoid for no reason. The very next day, after she deleted the guy's number, she left her phone out while she was in the shower. I checked it and immediately saw that she'd unblocked the number. I was completely checked out by then. After endless arguing, extreme gaslighting, and weeks of quietly resenting her every waking moment, I finally left. And out of revenge, I slept with her much hotter friend. I eventually met the guy. The friend of hers I slept with was mutual friends with him, and he lived in the building next to mine. He was literally a middle-aged dude who looked exactly like an Ed Bassmaster character. He's also known around my city as a guy who drives around desperately trying to groom women, especially those who are homeless or dealing with addiction, in hopes of sleeping with them. He has a reputation for offering money, rides, drugs, and alcohol. He lives on SSI, doesn't work, and stays in a filthy hoarder apartment, so he spends his mornings driving around town looking for them. I knew several women, including my ex and her friend, who used him, and from what I heard, the ones desperate enough actually slept with him. Story 39. I went to a Christmas party with a group I belonged to, and the wife had a few drinks and started bragging about lying to me over a money issue. Several months earlier, we'd had a problem with cash in the bank and were using checks. By the time it was all sorted out, we'd racked up around $450 in bounce check fees. It turned out she had taken $250 without telling me to give to her deadbeat family. So, $700 and a huge dose of shame later. I pretty much ended up leaving that group over it as well. Story 40. I found out he was secretly married and living a double life. He traveled for work, so I mostly saw him on weekends, which meant our relationship progressed slower than I was used to. But I was fine with that. He told me that he and his ex-wife were co-parenting and sleeping in separate rooms until his daughter turned 18 and graduated or went to college, which I was also okay with since that was only a few months away. I started getting suspicious after a year of dating. I brought up wanting to meet his daughter and ex-wife, since they were never home when I visited. I was always prepared to meet them, and we'd been together long enough that it felt strange not to have met either of them yet. He claimed he'd told his daughter about me and that we would make plans to meet. Of course, every time we made plans, they fell through. Then COVID happened. I work in long-term care, and 71 out of 100 of my residents were infected. We lost about 30 of them in a very short span of time. I was terrified of infecting anyone else, which delayed things even more. After an argument, I finally got fed up. I found the ex-wife on Facebook and asked her directly whether they were actually separated. She said no, they had been happily married for 11 years, and then she blocked me. Not only was I the mistress, but after I made a public post about him on Facebook, another acquaintance told me she had also been seeing him. He was a straight-up pathological liar and manipulator. I dread the day I run into him somewhere, because I'm not ready to go to jail for doing something stabby. Story 41. This was in the early aughts, shortly after my father died, and I suffered a miscarriage. He was searching for and chatting with pre-operative transgender women with the intent of meeting. He had cheated before and was actively having an affair with one of his students as well. I was trying to save the marriage for the sake of our child, but at some point, you realize it's not right for a kid to grow up thinking it's okay for dad to treat mom like that. Good riddance. Story 42. We were already broken up, but this was what finally made me move on from her and from multiple friendships. She had been hiding her relationship with a guy she knew I hated but tolerated for the sake of mutual friends. Once it came to light, several friends acted like I should have already known because it was so obvious. That's when I cut her and them out. I'm not saying she needed to make herself available only for me. I'm saying that if she was going to move on after I'd made my feelings known, I deserved to know she was moving on instead of being strung along and lied to. Story 43. I found out he was married and had actually managed to get married while we were still together. He had intentionally planned the wedding for when I would be on vacation in Greece. We lived a couple of hours apart and he was a cop working shifts. I also worked shifts, so it was normal not to see each other for 2 weeks at a time. That's how he was able to pull it off. I was able to track down his new wife and told her everything, complete with receipts and proof. Story 44. She slept with our roommate and tried to claim the child was mine until the roommate threatened to blackmail her unless she told me. He did not show up for the abortion, so I took her and stayed with her until she was safe. I have not seen her since. I later found out she had slept with about 6 to 10 men during the 6 years we were together. I also discovered that I cannot have children, which confirmed the child was not mine. Story 45. He stole my checks and forged my signature to pay his drug dealer. Story 46. He played with a Ouija board, and I honestly think he was possessed or something. A friend and I found the board under his bed while he was in the shower. Out of curiosity, we started messing with it. We asked questions, and she thought I was moving it while I thought she was. When he walked into the room, the planchette started moving in figure eights over and over, so fast we could not keep our hands on it. Then it stopped, and he got angry that we had taken it out. One night, I saw his face change. It scared me so badly that I broke up with him. He was being mean and degrading toward me. I finally told him I had had enough and that he needed to leave and never come back to my house. I thought he was gone, but I had an uneasy feeling and saw him looking through my windows. It was around 2 or 3 in the morning. Even though I was terrified, I was also afraid of getting into trouble because he was on my porch at that hour. I opened the main door but kept the screen door locked and told him to leave. He started talking like a little boy, saying he was sorry, begging me not to break up with him, promising it would never happen again. When I looked at his face, it had changed. He looked much younger, innocent, like a child, not at all like he had an hour earlier when he was calling me a whore. It freaked me out completely. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it because it was so late, but I forced myself to really look at him again to be sure of what I was seeing. I told him I was going to wake my parents and that he had better be gone. I shut and locked all the doors and woke my mom because I was afraid my dad would hurt him if he came outside. My mom believed me and stayed up with me. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, even in movies. He was 20 at the time, but his face changed to look like he was 12 or so. My mom said the devil can change people's faces to make them look innocent and lower your guard. I am glad she believed me because even now, it still scares me. It was deeply unnerving. Years later, I am still best friends with the girl who was there, and she has always sworn she was not moving it. I know she was not, because at one point it was moving so fast that her hand was not even on it, only mine. I never believed in any of that kind of thing until that boyfriend. Years later, I looked him up and saw that he had gone to prison. I found some court documents, and one filing said he was not himself because he had been taken over by an entity. That creeped me out badly. I was not really supposed to see it, but I had an attorney friend who had access. He had heard me tell the story about the planchette for years and sent me a screenshot. Seeing it as an actual document filed as evidence scared me even more. I am sure he was just mentally ill, but having that on record was still terrifying. He is still very creepy. Story 47. My girlfriend had an old friend of her baby's father. This friend had been in an accident that left him a little slow and gave him a large settlement. She was driving his car, which she claimed as her own. She had him buying Christmas presents for her and her kids and paying her rent. She told him I was just a friend and that they would be together when she could, but she never intended to be with him. When I found out what she was doing, I told him. Tragically, he ended up taking his own life. His mother had to call the police to get his truck back because she refused to return it. She also cheated frequently and drove drunk with her kids in the car. Never again. Story 48. When I was 21, my parents bought me a custom-designed diamond ring for my birthday. It was the first piece of real jewelry I had ever owned, and I cherished it. I wore it every day except when showering or doing dishes, when I would place it safely in my ring box. One day, I could not find it and completely panicked. I searched everywhere. My ex pretended to panic too. He deserved a damn Oscar for that performance and claimed to be looking everywhere as well. About a week later, his sister's wedding ring went missing. She and her husband filed a police report and mentioned my ring as well, since we were all living together. The police discovered both rings had been sold at a pawn shop by a man whose description matched my ex. He still denied it, but the pawn shop cameras showed otherwise. Story 49. I found a book of poetry he had written hidden on his side of the bed. He was 28, and the poetry was about his 19-year-old female co-worker he had befriended. He wrote about her beautiful gray eyes. My eyes are green. I had been covering all our living expenses for over a year and had just returned from a Valentine's Day trip that I again had paid for myself. While he was at work, I gathered all his things and kicked him out the same day. I even highlighted the particularly damning parts of the journal in case he was confused about why I was furious. He claimed that because he had not done anything physical, he thought it didn't count as cheating. But he was not in a relationship with me. He was in a fantasy relationship with her. I was just his meal ticket. Story 50. We got dressed up for a friend's wedding. I'm not the girly girl type, so it was the first time he had seen me in a dress. He was unusually touchy-feely and kept commenting on how much he loved my outfit. I just kept saying, thanks, until he said, no, you don't understand. I love your dress and love wearing dresses. To each their own, but he had hinted at questioning his sexuality a few times before. I already had a previous boyfriend who had cheated on me with his boss, who was also a man. I know everyone is different, and it's not fair to compare him to my ex, but I feared going through a similar experience again and ended it shortly after. Luckily, we parted on good terms. The last I heard, he had left the church and was in a relationship with another man. He seems happy, and I'm glad he found what works for him. Story 51. She had been stealing $500 a month from me for years while I was struggling to pay our bills. I became suspicious when she kept receiving expensive packages at the house, even though she did not have a job. It took me a while to catch on because of memory issues from a traumatic brain injury, but I eventually figured out the math wasn't mathing. Story 52. Long ago, I was a single dad, picking up and dropping off my kids at the elementary school. There was usually a lot of flirting with the other moms, but one in particular made it clear she was interested in more. She had just returned from serving in Iraq and was fresh out of the army. She was a single mother with 3 daughters, and her parents had stepped in to help care for them. About 3 months in, things started not adding up. She would introduce me to some people as her boyfriend, but to others as just a friend. It all came to a head when she planned to spend a weekend in the city visiting a friend who was on leave from Iraq. It seemed like no big deal at first. This was back in the MySpace days, and honestly, she and I weren't even MySpace friends. It didn't matter. I was sleeping with her daily. While she was away, I decided to send her a friend request on MySpace and looked her up. She was engaged to a man currently serving in Iraq. Her latest post was about coming to the city to spend time with his fiancée, along with a picture of the two of them. When she got back, I confronted her. Her defense was, I'm just really in the mood and the banging is really good with you. So why does it matter? We're never going to do more than bang. She could not understand why it might matter to him. She wanted to keep sleeping together, not tell him, and not get attached. I couldn't do that, mostly because I would hate to be that guy if it happened to me. I broke it off that day. I did not go out of my way to tell him, since he was in active combat. I figured it was best to leave him alone. Out of curiosity, I kept an eye on their MySpace pages, and in the end, he did not make it out of Iraq. I never saw her again. Story 53. She got jealous of my therapist, but claimed I wasn't making enough progress. Believing she had my best interests in mind, I switched to someone else, someone she recommended. After my second session with the new therapist, they suggested I look into a specific topic on my own. I did. I had never heard of personality disorders before, and what I learned explained everything about her. It was surreal. There was no way the therapist could have deduced her disorder from only 2 sessions. I realized her previous partner had also seen this therapist, which explained the professional insight and warning. She was unwilling to go to therapy herself, so it had to end. Story 54. She was a school teacher and came home crying one Friday. I asked her what happened, and she said she had overheard other teachers talking crap about her during recess. Trying to console her, I asked what they had said. Sobbing, she said they claimed she didn't get anything done because she was spending too much time with her teacher's assistant. She had cheated on me 2 years earlier, and we were trying to rebuild our marriage and trust. But I had to ask, are you spending too much time with him? The look on her face is one I'll never forget. It was that I wasn't supposed to tell you that look. I knew. I didn't say anything. I got up, went to the other room, and emailed the divorce attorney I had considered 2 years earlier, telling him I was ready. Story 55. It was a situationship, not a real relationship, thankfully. We had agreed to be casual because neither of us wanted to date. But this guy was having doing it with me because he was into my friend and thought I'd talk him up to her as my FWB. Since there weren't any feelings involved with us, he assumed that once we stopped hooking up, she might want to hook up with him. It wouldn't have worked anyway. He was mediocre in bed at best and started getting kind of mean to me after a couple of weeks. I never talked him up because there was nothing to promote. One night, while we were out with friends and he was beyond wasted, he got frustrated that I wasn't paying enough attention to him and eventually blurted out the truth. My friend immediately said, hell no, bro, and I told him to go screw himself. The next day, he didn't even remember that we'd ended things, just that we had fought. So I got to tell him off twice. My friend and I did end up hooking up for a few months, so at least I upgraded from a mean, mediocre guy to a kind, beautiful woman. Story 56. I found out she was sleeping with someone else during our talking stage, sleeping with both of us. A week before we officially started dating, she almost slept with him again. She lied about it for 4 months, claiming she was only sleeping with me. She said she hadn't been intimate for 4 months prior and that the last guy she slept with was her ex. I found texts between her and her friend talking about how hot it was and how she liked him more. I tried to work it out, but the trust was gone. She even lied about getting tested. She assured me she hated him and always wanted me more. Guess who she slept with a few days after the breakup? Yup. Then she called me jealous and toxic for not wanting to get back together. She literally moved into my house, redecorated, repainted, and talked about marriage, all while swearing on her mother's life that she wasn't sleeping with anyone else during our casual talking phase. And of course, it was all my fault. I was the toxic one, according to her. Story 57. He pretended to go to school for an entire semester, one I paid for, while he actually dropped out and spent his days hustling pool. I was a cheerleader who had unfortunately married the football team captain. My entire hometown adored him. Everywhere I went, people praised him as their football hero who had taken them to state. He would sit at the dining room table every day pretending to study, while in reality he was partying at pool halls and bars, dealing and doing drugs. The original plan had been that I would continue working full-time to pay the bills and help with his college. Then he would do the same while I went back to school. That, of course, never happened. Then he became dangerous, to himself and to others. I had to wrestle a gun out of his hands and take it apart. He grew delusional and obsessed with dreams that I would leave him. One night, he woke up and attacked me. Before that, he had removed the spark plugs from my car and scattered them on the ground so I could not escape. I tried anyway. I had to gather the spark plugs and put them back in while trying to get away. They were not installed correctly, and the car jerked and made horrible noises as I drove. I managed to reach a marina where I was incredibly lucky to find a mechanic who fixed it for me that night. After I left, he stalked and threatened me. It finally ended when he stabbed my neighbor, who had caught him trying to break into my window at my new apartment while I was asleep, and confronted him. That was when he finally went to jail. I have not heard from him since. I went to great lengths to avoid him and keep him from finding me, and I hope he never does again. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.